Hey there, welcome to Dread Lullabies. I'm so glad you're here with me tonight. You know, they say the night is for resting, but for some, the darkness is where the real world begins. Tonight, I've put together a few true stories that are meant to be heard in the quiet. Stories that remind us that sometimes the things that go bump in the night are more real than we'd like to believe. Before we get lost in the dark, I'd love to know where you're joining me from, so feel free to drop a comment and tell me where you're listening tonight. And if you find yourself coming back for more, maybe consider liking the video and subscribing. It really helps me keep these lullabies going for you. So, pull up the covers, get comfortable, and let's see what the night has in store for us.
I was 11 years old when my mom moved a new boyfriend into our house. By that age, I was already used to men coming and going. None of them ever really felt permanent, and I didn't get attached to any of them. So when she told me someone new was moving in, I didn't react much on the surface. Inside, though, I immediately didn't like him. That wasn't unusual for me. I didn't like most of my mom's boyfriends. Some were loud, some were awkward, some just felt wrong in ways I couldn't explain. At 11, you don't have the language to describe discomfort clearly. You just know when someone doesn't belong in your space. With this one, the feeling was instant. The moment he was around us, something in my body went on alert. He wasn't openly mean. He didn't yell or hit or act threatening in obvious ways. If anything, that made it harder to explain why I didn't like him. He tried to act normal. He smiled. He talked to my mom. He acted like he was supposed to be there, but I didn't feel safe around him. I remember watching him carefully, even if I didn't realize that's what I was doing at the time. I paid attention to where he stood in the room, how close he got, when he spoke, and when he stayed quiet. I noticed how he looked at things, how he moved through the house, like he was already comfortable, already claiming space. I didn't say anything to my mom about it at first. Kids learn quickly when their discomfort is inconvenient. You don't want to be dramatic. You don't want to cause problems. You don't want to be the reason your parent is upset or stressed. So you swallow it, you tell yourself it's fine, you stay in your room more, you make yourself smaller. That's what I did. One night my mom was working late. This wasn't unusual either. I was used to being alone in the house with whichever boyfriend happened to be there at the time. I went to bed like normal. I don't remember feeling particularly scared that night. I don't remember thinking anything bad was going to happen. I just went to sleep. At some point in the night, I woke up. Again, not gradually, not from a dream. I snapped awake. My eyes opened, and before I even fully understood why, I realized my bedroom door was opening. Slowly, quietly, just enough to let someone look in. He was standing there. He didn't rush in. He didn't speak. He didn't turn on the light. He just stood in the doorway looking into my room. I could see him clearly enough in the dim light, his shape, his outline, worth the fact that it was him, not my mom, not someone else. Time stretched in a strange way in that moment. I remember lying there, frozen, my heart pounding so loudly it felt like he must be able to hear it. I didn't scream. I didn't move right away. My body went into that quiet survival mode where you're trying not to draw attention to yourself. He stayed there for a few seconds, just long enough for it to be unmistakable, long enough for it to not be an accident, long enough that I knew he wasn't just passing by the room or checking something quickly. He was watching. Then I shifted. I don't even remember doing it intentionally. I might have rolled over slightly or adjusted the blankets. I coughed, or cleared my throat, or made some small, involuntary noise that let him know I was awake. The moment I did, everything changed. Mickey, he didn't speak. He didn't apologize. He didn't explain why he was there. He didn't step inside. He slowly backed away from the doorway and left. The door didn't slam. It didn't even close loudly. It was quiet, controlled, like he didn't want anyone else to know he'd been there at all. I lay there for a long time afterward. I didn't chase him. I didn't get up. I didn't run to call my mom. I just stayed in my bed, staring at the door, replaying what had just happened over and over in my head. My body felt tight, like I was holding my breath without realizing it. I didn't sleep much after that. Every small sound made me tense. Every creak of the house felt like footsteps. I stayed awake until morning, exhausted and scared in a way that felt different from nightmares or imaginary fears. This fear was grounded. It had weight to it. And the next day when my mom got home, I told her. I didn't embellish it. I didn't dramatize it. I just said what happened. I told her that I woke up and he was standing in my doorway while she was at work. I told her he left when he realized I was awake. I remember watching her face change as I spoke. At first she looked confused, then concerned. Then something harder set in. Anger, fear, recognition. I could tell she understood immediately that this was not okay, that this wasn't a misunderstanding or something innocent. She didn't question me. She didn't ask if I was sure. She didn't suggest I imagined it. She didn't try to explain it away. She believed me. Within 24 hours, he was gone. Not a slow breakup. Not a drawn-out conversation. He was out of the house completely. His things were gone. His presence was gone. And just like that, the house felt different, safer. It's only as an adult that I fully understand how serious that moment was. At 11, I knew it was wrong, but I didn't have the full context. I didn't understand what could have happened if I hadn't woken up. If I hadn't moved, if I hadn't made a sound. I understand it now. That realization came slowly over the years, sometimes hitting me out of nowhere, a memory resurfacing, a chill running through me, a sudden awareness of how close something dangerous had come. What stays with me most is how quiet it was. No dramatic confrontation, no yelling, no obvious threat. Just a man standing silently in a child's doorway in the middle of the night. Just long enough to test whether he was alone with someone asleep. Just long enough to see if he could stay unnoticed. That silence is what makes it terrifying. I think a lot about how many kids don't speak up. How many second guess themselves. How many are taught not to cause trouble. How many parents don't believe them when they do speak up. I was lucky. Lucky that I woke up. Lucky that I made a noise. Lucky that my mom listened. I don't know what his intentions were. I don't want to speculate beyond what happened. But I don't need to know his intentions to know that what he did was wrong. Deeply, unmistakably wrong. That experience changed me. It taught me to trust my instincts early. It taught me that discomfort doesn't need proof to be valid. It taught me that danger doesn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it stands quietly in a doorway, waiting. It also taught me something about my mom. She believed me. She acted immediately. She didn't minimize it or try to preserve a relationship at my expense. She chose my safety without hesitation. That mattered more than I probably ever told her. Even now, years later, I sometimes think about that night. About lying in bed, seeing the door open, seeing him there. about how small I was, about how quickly things could have gone another way. But I also think about the next day, about telling my mom, about being believed, about waking up to a house where he no longer existed. That's the part I hold on to most. Because while that memory is frightening, it's also a reminder that sometimes the worst thing doesn't happen. Sometimes instinct, awareness, and one person listening are enough to stop something before it becomes a tragedy. I was 11. I trusted my gut. I spoke up. And it ended there. One of my nephews and I are less than a year apart in age. Growing up, we were more like siblings than aunt and nephew. We were always around each other, always roughhousing, always joking, always competing over stupid things. We knew each other's habits, voices, and moods extremely well. There was nothing mysterious about being around him, nothing unfamiliar. That's part of why this still bothers me. One night, for reasons that weren't unusual at the time, we had to sleep in the same bed. We were staying somewhere temporarily, and there just wasn't enough space. Neither of us was thrilled about it, but it wasn't a big deal. We were teens, annoyed but tired, and eventually we fell asleep. The room itself was quiet and dark. There was no TV on, no music. Just the faint light coming through the window from outside, I guess enough to barely outline shapes in the room. The kind of light that lets you see shadows but not details. The kind that turns everything into silhouettes. At some point in the night, I woke up. It wasn't gradual. I didn't drift into awareness slowly. I snapped awake, heart racing, like my body had sensed something before my brain had caught up. For a moment, I didn't know why I was awake. Then I felt it. The foot of the bed was shaking violently. Not gently. Not like someone rolling over. Not like a leg twitch or a dream movement. This was aggressive, rhythmic, forceful movement. The mattress was being pushed down and released rapidly, over and over, like something was pressing on it with both hands. The entire foot of the bed was moving. I froze. My first thought wasn't ghost or monster. It was pure confusion mixed with fear. My brain was scrambling to figure out what could possibly be doing that. Someone shaking the bed, someone climbing onto it, someone messing with us. But none of those explanations fit what I was feeling. Slowly, my eyes adjusted. The faint light from the window was enough to make out shapes at the foot of the bed. And that's when I saw it. There was a black form at the foot of the bed. It wasn't just a shadow. It had shape. It had mass. It looked roughly the size of another kid, maybe slightly hunched, positioned at the foot of the mattress. It had arms. I could see the movement clearly. The arms were pressing up and down on the mattress rapidly, causing the bed to shake. The motion was deliberate, repetitive, and fast. This wasn't something brushing past the bed. This wasn't something falling onto it. This was something actively interacting with it. I couldn't see facial features. I couldn't see details like hair or clothing. The form was completely black, darker than the surrounding darkness, like it absorbed light instead of reflecting it. But it was solid enough that you could make it out clearly against the dim background. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears. I sat up. The moment I did, my nephew spoke. "I see it too. WTF is that?" The instant he said that, everything inside me dropped. Up until that moment, there had been a tiny part of my brain desperately clinging to the idea that maybe I was dreaming. Maybe I was half asleep. Maybe my eyes were playing tricks on me. Maybe my body was reacting to something internal, but he saw it too. He didn't ask what I was doing. Like, he didn't sound confused about why the bed was shaking. He didn't sound like someone waking up slowly. He sounded alert, terrified, and completely awake. And he described exactly what I was seeing without me having said a word. That's when the fear became overwhelming. Two people were seeing the same thing at the same time. The bed was still shaking. The black form was still there, arms moving rapidly, pressing into the mattress like it was determined to wake us up. That's the strangest part when I think back on it. It didn't feel random. It didn't feel chaotic. It felt intentional, purposeful, like it wanted our attention. I didn't scream. I didn't freeze again. I reacted. I reached over and turned the lamp on. The room filled with light instantly, and the form was gone. No fading, no retreat, no movement away from the bed. 1 second it was there, solid and unmistakable. And the next second there was nothing. The foot of the bed stopped shaking completely. The mattress went still, as if nothing had ever touched it. The room looked completely normal. Same bed, same walls, same furniture. No one standing there, no shadows that didn't belong, no sign that anything had been there at all. But my heart was still racing. My nephew was sitting upright beside me, wide-eyed, breathing fast, staring at the foot of the bed where it had been. Neither of us spoke for a moment. Then we both started talking at once. What did you see? Did you see the arms? It was black, right? It was shaking the bed. We described the same thing. Same size, same position, same movement, same terrifying presence. There was no discrepancy, no confusion. Maybe it was this. We had both seen the same being at the same time from the same angle, reacting to the same physical sensation. We checked the room. We got out of bed, turned on more lights, checked under the bed, behind furniture, in the doorway, everywhere. There was nowhere someone could have gone without us seeing them. No place to hide. No explanation that made sense. No one else in the house had been awake. No one had come into the room. Nothing had fallen onto the bed. There was no reason for the mattress to have been shaking like that. We didn't go back to sleep that night. There was no chance of it. We stayed awake, sitting up, lights on, talking quietly, trying to calm ourselves down. Every small sound made us jump. Every shadow looked suspicious. Even though the thing was gone, the feeling that it could come back lingered heavily in the room. What stuck with me most wasn't just fear. It was certainty. I am completely convinced that whatever that was, it wanted to wake us up. It didn't hurt us. It didn't grab us. It didn't climb onto the bed or try to attack. It shook the bed violently enough to pull us out of sleep and make sure we were fully awake. And the moment we were, and the light came on, it was gone. Why? I have no idea. That question has stayed with me for years. What purpose did it have? What would have happened if we hadn't woken up? If we hadn't turned on the light? If only one of us had seen it instead of both? I've thought about sleep paralysis, but this wasn't that. We could move. I sat up. I reached over and turned on the lamp. My nephew spoke clearly. We weren't frozen. We weren't trapped in our bodies. And sleep paralysis doesn't explain a bed physically shaking or two people seeing the same thing simultaneously. I've thought about shadows, but shadows don't press down on mattresses repeatedly. They don't cause physical movement, and shadows don't disappear instantly when a light is turned on without changing shape or direction. I've thought about shared hallucinations, but that explanation falls apart too. Shared hallucinations don't usually involve synchronized physical sensations like a violently shaking bed. They also don't line up in such precise detail. I've thought about someone playing a prank, but there was no one who could have been there. No way in or out. No sound of movement leaving the room. And the speed and strength of the shaking didn't feel human. It felt too fast, too intense. Most of all, I think about how aware it seemed. It reacted to us waking up. It didn't linger once we were fully alert and the light was on. It didn't stay to be seen clearly. It didn't want to be observed in full light. It wanted us awake, not watching it. That thought still sends chills through me. I don't go around claiming I know what it was. I don't say it was a ghost, a demon, a shadow person, or anything else with a label attached. I honestly don't know. All I know is what I experienced, and what my nephew experienced with me. Two people, awake, seeing the same thing, feeling the same physical force. That kind of experience changes you. It changes how you think about sleep, about darkness, about the idea that being awake is always safer than being asleep. It makes you wonder how many things might exist just beyond our awareness, only interacting with us when we're vulnerable enough to notice them. To this day, I believe there was some type of being in that room. I believe it wanted to wake us up. And I believe it succeeded. Why it wanted that, I will probably never know. But the fact that it didn't harm us, didn't linger, and disappeared the moment we were fully awake and the light was on, makes me think its purpose wasn't malicious in the way people usually imagine. But that doesn't make it any less unsettling. Some experiences don't come with answers. They just leave you with certainty. And I am certain of this. Whatever that was at the foot of the bed that night was real enough to shake the mattress, real enough for two people to see it, and real enough to make sure we didn't sleep through whatever moment it had come for. We never forgot it, and I don't think we ever will. I was about 14 years old when this happened, old enough to know the difference between normal house noises and something that absolutely was not normal. I remember it clearly because I was wide awake, not drifting in and out of sleep, not dreaming, not half-conscious. I was fully alert, lying in bed in the middle of the night, staring at the ceiling and listening to the quiet of the house. Two of our family dogs were in the bedroom with me. That detail matters because these weren't dogs that slept through everything. They were alert, protective, and very aware of their surroundings. If something moved outside, they usually noticed. If a strange sound happened, they reacted. That night they were calm, settled near the bed, breathing softly in the dark. The house was quiet in the way rural houses are quiet at night. We lived in a rural area, far from neighbors, far from traffic, far from streetlights. At night, there were no city sounds, no sirens, no cars passing by, just insects, wind, and the occasional animal in the distance. The kind of quiet that feels deep and complete, like the world has gone to sleep. I was lying there, not thinking about anything in particular, when it happened. Without warning, there was a crash on top of the house. Not a bump, not a thud, not something that could be explained away as the house settling or a branch brushing against the roof. This was a violent, explosive crash, loud enough to make my entire body tense instantly. The sound was so forceful that it shook the house. I I felt it through the walls, through the bed, through my chest. For a split second, I couldn't move. My heart jumped into my throat, and my brain scrambled to understand what had just happened. It sounded like something massive had fallen directly onto the roof, like something heavy had been dropped from the sky. The noise was sharp and sudden, followed by a deep, resonating impact that rolled through the structure of the house. Before I even had time to think, both dogs reacted. They snapped their heads up at the exact same time, ears alert, bodies stiff. They weren't barking, but they were clearly startled. They stared toward the ceiling, toward the sound, their attention locked on the spot where the noise had come from. That alone told me this wasn't my imagination. Animals don't pretend. They don't misinterpret things the way humans sometimes do. They heard it too. The house went completely silent afterward. No rolling noise, no sliding sound, no follow-up crash, just silence. Thick, unnatural silence, like the world was holding its breath. I lay there listening, waiting for something else to happen. Another impact, footsteps, scraping, anything. Nothing came. I remember thinking, someone has to wake up. There's no way no one else heard that. That was too loud, too violent, too obvious. But when I listened carefully, I could hear the soft sounds of the house at night. Someone breathing in another room. The faint hum of electricity. Everyone else was still asleep. That made it worse. The idea that something could crash onto the house with that much force and not wake anyone else felt unreal. I lay there for a moment longer, trying to calm myself, trying to convince myself there had to be a logical explanation. A tree branch, maybe? That was my first thought. We were surrounded by trees, and sometimes branches fell, especially during storms. But it hadn't been windy that night. No rain, no storm. And even when branches fell, they didn't usually sound like that. They scraped. They rolled. They cracked. This sound was different. It was a single massive impact. I couldn't stay in bed. Slowly, carefully, I got up. The dogs stayed close to me, following as I moved through the dark room. I turned on a small light, enough to see but not enough to wake anyone else. My heart was still pounding, and every creak of the floor made me flinch. I walked through the house, room by room, looking out of the windows. First, I checked the side of the house that faced the trees. I pressed my face close to the glass, scanning the yard. Nothing. No fallen branches, no broken limbs, no disturbed ground. Everything looked exactly the same as it always did. I moved to another window. Still nothing. I checked the front of the house, then the back. I expected to see something obvious, a huge branch, debris, something broken, something that would explain the noise and the impact. But the yard was empty and still. The moonlight showed no signs of damage, no movement, no shadows that didn't belong. The dogs stayed close, alert but quiet. They didn't growl, they didn't bark, they didn't act like there was an intruder or an animal nearby. They just watched, following my movements, occasionally glancing back toward the ceiling as if they were still trying to understand what had happened. Going outside was not an option. I knew better than that. It was the middle of the night. We lived in a rural area. If something had crashed onto the house, which the last thing I was going to do was step into the dark to investigate alone, that felt like asking for trouble. Whatever it was, if it was still out there. I didn't want to meet it face to face. Eventually, I went back to my room. I lay back down in bed, but there was no chance of sleep. My mind replayed the sound over and over, the violence of it, the way it shook the house, the way the dogs had reacted instantly. I listened for hours, expecting another crash, another sign, some explanation to reveal itself. Nothing else happened. The rest of the night passed slowly, every minute stretched thin by anticipation. I must have drifted into a light sleep at some point, because morning eventually came. Sunlight filled the room and the normal sounds of the house returned. Birds. Movement. Life continuing as if nothing strange had happened at all. As soon as I could, I went outside. In the daylight, everything should have made sense. Daylight has a way of shrinking fears, of turning unknowns into obvious answers. I walked all the way around the house, scanning the ground carefully. I looked for broken branches, dents, disturbed dirt, anything that could show where something had fallen. There was nothing. I checked the trees closest to the house. None of them had broken limbs. No signs of recent damage, no leaves scattered in a way that suggested impact. Everything looked untouched. Then I looked up at the roof. I expected to see something there, a dent, a cracked shingle, a broken section. Some kind of damage that explained the force of the crash. But the roof looked normal. No missing shingles, no holes. I thought no debris caught along the edges. Nothing. I walked the perimeter again, slower this time, making sure I hadn't missed anything. I looked under the eaves, near the foundation, around the yard. There was no sign that anything had fallen onto the house at all. That's when the unease really set in. Because sounds like that don't just happen without leaving evidence. A crash that shakes a house comes from something physical, something with weight, something that impacts with force. And yet there was nothing. No mark, no trace, no explanation. I asked my family if they had heard anything in the night. No one had. They looked at me like I was mistaken or maybe exaggerating. They suggested it could have been thunder, even though there hadn't been a storm. Or a branch, even though there were no branches on the ground. Or the house settling, even though I had lived there long enough to know what that sounded like. None of those explanations fit. What stuck with me most was the dogs. They had reacted instantly, in the exact same way. They had looked up, toward the sound, startled and alert. Animals don't imagine impacts. They don't mistake ordinary house noises for violent crashes. If they reacted like that, something real had happened. But what? That question stayed with me. Even years later, I still think about that night. About lying awake in the dark, about the sudden explosion of sound, about the way the house shook beneath me, about the silence afterward, about walking around in the daylight, searching for answers and finding none. It wasn't just fear, it was confusion. Fear fades with time. Confusion lingers. I've replayed it in my head countless times, trying to fit it into something logical. Maybe something fell from a great height and bounced away. Maybe it hit the roof, at an angle, and rolled off without leaving damage. Maybe it was something rare, unlikely, but still possible. But no explanation ever fully satisfies me, because whatever it was, it hit the house with incredible force, and then vanished without a trace. There are moments in life that don't come with answers, experiences that don't wrap themselves up neatly. This was one of them. It didn't end with a reveal or an explanation. It just ended with a question mark that never went away. And sometimes that's the most unsettling part. Not knowing, not being able to point to something and say, that's what it was. That's what made that sound. That's what shook the house. All I know is this: I was awake. The dogs were awake. and the crash was real, and whatever caused it left no sign that it was ever there at all. About 13 years ago, I had an old friend who slowly disappeared from my life in a way that didn't make sense at the time. We had been close for years, not casual friends, but the kind where you could show up unannounced, talk honestly, argue, laugh, and still know the friendship was solid. Then, without warning, he started avoiding me. At first, it was subtle. Calls went unanswered. Texts weren't returned. When I knocked on his door, no one answered, even though I could tell someone was home. I'd see his car parked outside, lights on, but nothing. It felt strange, but I tried to give him the benefit of the doubt. People get busy. People go through phases. Life pulls you in different directions. Weeks turned into months. By then, it didn't feel normal anymore. It felt deliberate. Like he was actively trying not to exist in my world. I ran through possibilities in my head. Was he angry at me? Had I said something wrong? Was he depressed, sick, in trouble? Every scenario felt possible, but none of them felt right. What hurt the most was the silence. Not knowing why someone you care about suddenly cuts you out messes with your head. You replay old conversations, wondering if you missed something important. You question yourself. You start to feel foolish for caring so much when the other person clearly doesn't seem to care at all. I kept trying. I left messages. I knocked on his door more than once. I even tried reaching out through mutual friends. But no one seemed to know much. Or maybe they did and weren't saying. Looking back, that's probably the case. Eventually, I stopped trying as hard. Not because I didn't care, but because there's only so much rejection you can take before you start protecting yourself. I told myself that if he wanted to talk, he knew how to reach me. Still, the whole thing felt unfinished. Like a conversation that had been cut off mid-sentence and never resumed. The truth came out later. He'd gotten addicted to heroin. When I learned that, everything clicked into place. The avoidance, the silence, the hiding. He hadn't disappeared because he didn't care. He disappeared because he was ashamed and scared. He knew me well enough to know that if I got him on the phone or face to face, I would have called him out. I would have confronted him hard. I would have read him the riot act, because that's what friends do when they're terrified of losing someone. He wasn't wrong. I would have done exactly that. He avoided me because he wasn't ready to face himself, and I would have forced him to. So instead, he vanished, letting the addiction take priority over everything else, including the people who cared about him the most. I didn't know any of that at the time. All I knew was that one day, out of nowhere, I got a phone call at work that changed everything. It was his daughter. The moment I heard her voice, I knew something was wrong. She was panicked, crying so hard, she could barely get the words out. She told me that her dad was dead. Just like that. No build-up, no warning. One sentence that dropped like a weight straight into my chest. She didn't know what to do. She was overwhelmed, scared, and alone in that moment. So I did what I could. I helped her figure out next steps, who to call, what needed to happen, how to navigate the immediate chaos that follows a sudden death. I went into problem-solving mode because that felt easier than stopping to feel what was happening. After the call ended, I just sat there, at work, surrounded by people who had no idea that my world had just shifted. I remember staring at my desk feeling numb, trying to wrap my head around the fact that the friend who had avoided me for months was gone forever. No chance to confront him. No chance to yell at him. No chance to tell him I was scared for him. No chance to fix anything. That's one of the cruelest parts of addiction-related deaths. They don't just take the person. They take the opportunity for resolution. You're left with unfinished sentences and conversations that will never happen. Grief came in waves. Anger was part of it. Anger at him for choosing the drug. Anger at myself for not pushing harder. Anger at the situation for being so senseless. But there was also sadness, deep and heavy, mixed with a strange kind of understanding. He didn't avoid me because he didn't care. He avoided me because he cared too much and couldn't face what he had become. Then came the unexpected part. His death didn't just hurt emotionally, it caused real damage in my life in ways I never saw coming. Complications I couldn't have predicted. Situations I got pulled into simply because of my connection to him. Problems that lingered long after the funeral, long after people stopped checking in, long after the initial shock wore off. In a very real way, his death wrecked parts of my life. That's hard to explain to people who haven't lived it. Society has a neat way of packaging grief. There's a window where it's acceptable to be devastated, and then you're expected to move on. But some losses don't end when the services are over. Some losses keep taking from you, quietly and relentlessly, months or even years later. What made it even stranger was the kind of relationship we had. We were close enough friends that, if he were still alive, I could have looked him straight in the eye and said, "Thanks, dude. You fucked me from beyond the grave." And he would have laughed. Not in a cruel way. In that dark, shared humor way that only people who truly know each other can manage. That thought crossed my mind more than once, and it hurt. Because humor had always been part of how we coped with things. It was how we dealt with stress, anger, and pain. Losing him meant losing that shared language too. And there was no one left who understood that exact dynamic, that exact tone. What stays with me the most is the regret, mixed with acceptance. I regret that I didn't know what was really happening while there was still time. I regret that our last months were filled with silence instead of honesty. I regret that the last version of him I knew was one who was hiding, not the friend I remembered. But I also accept that addiction doesn't follow logic or love. You can care deeply about someone and still not be able to save them. You can be willing to fight for them and still lose. That's a lesson I learned the hard way. 13 years later, I still think about him. Not constantly, but often enough. Sometimes when something reminds me of a joke we would have made. Sometimes when I hear about someone else struggling with addiction. Sometimes when I think about how fragile people really are, even the ones who seem strong. His death taught me that avoidance can be its own kind of goodbye. That silence doesn't mean absence of care, and that sometimes the people who disappear aren't running from you. They're running from themselves. If he were here now, I know exactly what I'd say. I'd tell him I was pissed. I'd tell him I missed him. And then I'd tell him, "You really screwed me over, man." And he'd laugh. That's the part that hurts the most. I had a childhood friend pass away when we were 8. Even now, decades later, that sentence still feels strange to say. 8 years old is an age where life is supposed to feel endless. Days blur together into routines of school, games, laughter, and small worries that never last very long. Death doesn't belong there. It doesn't fit. And yet, that's when I first truly encountered it. We played together almost every day. He lived close by, close enough that we didn't need to plan anything. We'd just show up at each other's houses, knock on the door, and ask if the other could come out. Sometimes we played video games. Sometimes we played outside until the sun started to go down and parents called us home. There was nothing remarkable about our friendship in the way adults define things, but to me it was everything. He was just always there. At that age, you don't think about tomorrow. You don't think about permanence or loss or how fragile things really are. You assume that people exist in a fixed state. Friends are part of your world the same way your house is, the same way the street you live on is. They don't disappear, they're just there until they aren't. One day I came home from school like any other day. I don't remember anything unusual about the walk home or the ride or whatever brought me there. I wasn't anxious, I wasn't sad, I was just thinking about normal kid stuff, what I was going to do later, what game I wanted to play, whether I'd see my friend that evening. When I got close to my house, I noticed something odd. There were emergency vehicles on the street, fire trucks, an ambulance, lights flashing. My cheats, though no sirens at that moment. That alone was unusual enough to make me stop and stare. Kids notice things like that immediately. It feels exciting and scary at the same time, even before you understand what's really going on. Then I realized where they were parked. They were at my friend's house. That's when the confusion set in. I didn't feel fear right away. I felt disbelief. My brain didn't connect the dots. I just stood there, staring, trying to make sense of it. Maybe someone got hurt. Maybe there was a fire scare. Maybe it was a drill. Kids are very good at inventing explanations that don't involve the worst possible outcome. When I went inside my own house, my parents were waiting for me. That alone was strange. Usually I'd come home, dump my bag, and wander off to do whatever. But this time they asked me to sit down. And their faces were serious, in a way I hadn't seen before. Not angry, not disappointed, just heavy. They started talking. They told me my friend had come home. There had been an accident. He drowned. They said it gently, carefully, choosing their words like they were handling something fragile. Then they said he was in a better place. I remember listening to them and feeling disconnected from what they were saying. Not because I didn't understand the words, but because they didn't feel real. It sounded like a story they were telling me, not something that had actually happened. Even at 8 years old, I didn't really buy into the religious part of what they were saying. The idea of a better place felt abstract and strange, especially when applied to someone I had been playing games with just days before. But I knew my parents meant well, and they weren't lying to me to be cruel. They were trying to soften something that couldn't be softened. They were trying to protect me from pain that was already inevitable. I could see it in their faces. They looked like they were bracing themselves, like they were afraid of how I would react. As they talked, I felt an urge to look outside. I don't know why. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe part of me needed proof. Maybe I needed to see something concrete because words weren't enough. While they were still explaining, still trying to guide me through it, I stood up and went to the window. And that's when I saw him. Or rather, I saw what was left. The emergency responders were wheeling his body out of the house on a stretcher. It was covered, but I knew exactly what it was. There was no mistaking it. I watched them load the stretcher into the ambulance, the doors closing behind it, with a finality that made my chest feel tight. No dramatic music, no slow motion, just a body being moved from one place to another. It was surreal. I remember thinking how quiet it all felt, how normal the street looked, how wrong it was that the world hadn't stopped. Cars still passed. The sky looked the same. The day continued on like nothing extraordinary had happened, even though something had ended forever. My parents realized what I was watching and came over to me. I don't remember exactly what they said. I don't remember if they tried to pull me away from the window or if they just stood there with me. What I remember is the feeling. A strange mix of shock, sadness, and a kind of numb curiosity. I wasn't hysterical. I didn't scream or cry right away. I just stared, trying to understand how someone could be alive one day and gone the next. How the difference between those two states could be so thin. How something as ordinary as coming home could end in something irreversible. At 8 years old, I didn't have the emotional vocabulary to describe grief. What I felt wasn't like the sadness I knew from scraped knees or broken toys. It was deeper and quieter. It sat in my chest like a weight. I felt confused more than anything. Confused about why this happened. Confused about why him. Confused about what this meant for everything else in my life. That night felt different. The house felt quieter. Even normal sounds felt louder because of the silence underneath them. I remember going to bed and staring at the ceiling, replaying the image of the stretcher in my mind. I wondered if my friend was scared, if he knew what was happening, if he felt pain. Questions that no one could answer. School felt strange after that. Kids would talk about it in hushed voices. Some didn't know what to say. Some asked questions that felt too blunt. Others avoided the topic completely. Teachers tried to be gentle. Parents whispered. His desk was suddenly empty. That empty desk was one of the hardest things to see. It was physical proof that he wasn't coming back. No more sitting there. No more raising his hand. No more whispering during lessons. Just a space where someone used to exist. At that age, you start to realize something unsettling. People aren't guaranteed. Friends aren't permanent. Life doesn't follow the rules you assume it does. And that realization settled into me quietly and never really left. As I grew older, I understood more about what drowning actually means. I learned how quickly it can happen, how silent it can be, how often it's an accident, not a dramatic struggle like in movies. That knowledge made it even heavier in hindsight. It wasn't some grand tragedy with villains or warnings. It was just one of those cruel moments where timing and circumstance collide. What stayed with me most was the suddenness. There was no goodbye, no slow decline, no chance to prepare. He was there one day, gone the next. That became a life lesson for me, whether I wanted it or not. It taught me early that time is fragile, that relationships matter because they can be taken away without warning, that things you assume will always be part of your life can vanish in an instant. It made me more aware, even as a child, that the world isn't safe just because it feels familiar. I think that experience shaped me in ways I didn't fully understand until much later. I became more observant, more reflective, maybe a little more serious than other kids my age. I started thinking about things like mortality and fairness earlier than most. I questioned the idea that everything happens for a reason, not in an angry way, but in a quiet, skeptical one. I also learned something about adults that day. I learned that sometimes they don't have answers either. That sometimes all they can do is try to soften the truth and hope it's enough. My parents did their best. They tried to explain death in a way they thought would comfort me. Even if I didn't fully accept their explanation, I understood later how hard that must have been for them. That moment by the window stays with me. Watching the stretcher, watching the ambulance, realizing that what I was seeing was final. That memory never faded. It didn't become blurry or dreamlike. It stayed sharp, like a photograph burned into my mind. It wasn't graphic, it wasn't dramatic, but it was real, and that's why it stuck. That was the first time I truly understood that death isn't just something that happens to old people or strangers on the news. It can happen to someone your own age, someone you laughed with, someone you expected to see tomorrow. That knowledge changes you. Even now, when I think about how quickly life can change, my mind sometimes goes back to that day, to that window, to that stretcher, to the feeling of standing there as a child, realizing that the world I thought I understood was much more fragile than I believed. It was a lesson I learned far too early, but it was a lesson that stayed with me. Someone is there one day, gone the next. And once you truly understand that, you never see life quite the same way again. I remember when I was about 5, I was riding back with my dad somewhere during a rainy night when we had to come to a stop due to an accident. Traffic was not going anywhere, so my dad told me to stay in the car, passenger seat, yay 1970s, while he went to find out what was going on. That part of the memory is strangely calm, almost peaceful in a way that only makes sense when you're a kid. I didn't think anything bad was happening. I didn't understand accidents or danger the way adults do. I was just sitting there, small legs dangling off the seat, rain tapping against the windows, watching the world glow red and blue from all the emergency lights. It was nighttime, and the rain made everything look smeared and blurry, like the whole road was underwater. The windshield wipers moved back and forth in that slow, steady rhythm, each squeaking faintly as they cleared sheets of rain. The road ahead was filled with cars that weren't moving, their brake lights glowing softly through the mist. I remember thinking it felt like we were stuck in one long tunnel of lights. When my dad opened the door to get out, cold air rushed in for a second before it shut again. I watched him walk away, his figure getting smaller as he moved toward the flashing lights up ahead. I wasn't scared. He had told me to stay put, and I trusted him completely. At that age, if your parent says everything is fine, you believe it. So I waited. I don't know how long he was gone. Time feels different when you're 5. It could have been 5 minutes or half an hour. All I remember is sitting there, pressed against the seat, watching the reflections of police cars, ambulances, tourists, and rain dance across the glass. The lights felt hypnotic, red, blue, white, over and over again, lighting up the inside of the car like a strange, silent show. I remember the sounds too, sirens in the distance, muffled voices, the low hum of engines idling. Everything felt muted, like the rain was wrapping the whole scene in cotton. I didn't feel afraid, but I did feel that something was different. Grown up different. The kind of different you don't yet have words for. Eventually my dad came back. I remember the sound of the driver's door opening and closing, the way the car shifted slightly when he sat down. He didn't say anything right away. He just started the engine again and sat there for a moment staring forward. Even at 5 years old, I could tell something about him had changed. His face looked tight, remained serious in a way I wasn't used to seeing. I asked him what happened. He took a breath before answering, like he was choosing his words carefully. He told me that 2 girls had flipped their T-top Trans Am and that they weren't wearing seatbelts. He explained it simply, in a way he thought a child could understand, but even then I could tell it was something bad. For anyone who doesn't know what a T-top is, it's basically a car with a partial sunroof. Instead of one solid roof, there are removable panels with a bar running down the middle. At 5 years old, I didn't know or care about car design, but later in life, that detail became important. It explained why what happened next was so horrific. My dad didn't go into graphic detail. He didn't need to. He said that because they weren't wearing seatbelts, they were partially ejected from the car when it flipped. Gravity, physics, and reality did the rest. Even as a kid, I could hear the weight in his voice when he said it. He wasn't being dramatic. He wasn't trying to scare me. He was just stating facts, and those facts felt heavy. We started moving again slowly, as traffic finally began to inch forward. As we approached the accident, my dad told me not to look. I remember him saying it more than once. "Don't look. Keep your eyes forward." His voice was firm but gentle, like he was trying to protect me from something he knew I couldn't unsee. That alone made it feel scary. When adults tell you not to look, it makes you want to look even more. I tried not to. I really did. But curiosity and that strange pull toward the unknown got the better of me. As we drove past the wreck, I turned my head just enough to see out of the window. The car was still upside down. That image burned itself into my mind instantly. The roof, crushed flat against the road, wheels pointing toward the sky, rainwater running over twisted metal. It didn't look like a car anymore. It looked like something broken beyond repair, something wrong in a way that felt unnatural. I didn't see their bodies. That part, at least, I was spared from. I don't remember seeing faces or limbs or anything clearly human. But I saw enough. Torn metal, shattered glass, debris scattered across the road. The shape of the car told the story without needing to show anything else. Even at 5 years old, I understood that something terrible had happened. The rain made everything worse. Water pooled around the wreckage, reflecting the flashing lights in broken patterns. It felt like the whole scene was underwater, like we were passing through some kind of nightmare that didn't belong in the real world. My dad kept his hand on the steering wheel, eyes straight ahead. I could tell he was trying to get past it as quickly as possible. The car moved slowly, almost respectfully, like the road itself knew what had happened there. After we passed the accident, the lights faded behind us. The road ahead grew dark again, lit only by our headlights and the occasional street lamp. The rain kept falling, steady and relentless, like it was trying to wash everything away. Inside the car, it was quiet. My dad didn't talk much after that, and I didn't ask any more questions. But my mind was already working, as I didn't have the words or understanding to fully process what I'd seen, but I felt it. A deep, uneasy feeling in my stomach. A sense that the world was suddenly bigger and more dangerous than I'd realized before. That night stayed with me, not in a loud, dramatic way, but in a quiet, creeping way that followed me into adulthood. I didn't have nightmares about it, but I would think about it from time to time, especially on rainy nights. The sound of rain on car windows would bring back flashes of red and blue light. The image of the upside-down car would surface without warning. As I got older, I understood more about what had happened. I understood what it meant to be ejected from a vehicle. I understood how seatbelts save lives. I understood how fragile the human body really is when physics takes over. And with that understanding came a deeper sense of dread. Those girls were young. They were probably laughing, driving too fast, feeling invincible the way young people often do. Maybe they thought seatbelts were uncomfortable. Maybe they thought nothing bad would happen on a rainy night. Maybe they didn't think at all. And then, in a moment, everything ended. What makes that memory so unsettling isn't just the accident itself. It's the way it intersected with my childhood. I was 5 years old, sitting in the front seat, because it was the 1970s and no one thought twice about it. I was safe, warm, and protected, while just a few feet away, lives had been destroyed in a way I couldn't fully grasp at the time. That contrast is what makes it creepy. The world felt normal inside our car, familiar, controlled. But outside, chaos and death had just happened. And the line between those two realities felt terrifyingly thin. One wrong turn, one bad decision, one moment of bad luck, and everything changes. I think about my dad sometimes, and how that night must have felt for him. He walked up to that scene knowing he had a child sitting alone in the car behind him. He saw things he didn't want his kid to see. He came back and chose his words carefully, trying to explain enough without causing fear. He told me not to look, knowing exactly why. That kind of protection stays with you. Even now, decades later, that memory feels vivid. The rain, the lights, the upside-down car. My dad's voice telling me not to look. The heavy silence afterward. It has been 46 years, and I can still picture it like it happened yesterday. It's strange how certain moments imprint themselves on you. I've lived a full life since then. I've seen other accidents, heard worse stories, experienced loss in different ways. But that early exposure to death, especially in such a sudden and violent form, planted something deep in my mind. It was my first real understanding that life can end instantly without warning, without meaning. That's why that night sticks with me. Not because I saw something gruesome, but because I saw enough to know the truth, enough to understand that the world isn't always safe, even when you're doing something as ordinary as driving down a road on a rainy night. Even now, when I drive in the rain, I think about it. I think about headlights reflecting off wet pavement. I think about how easy it is to lose control. I think about seatbelts, about speed. It's about how quickly things can go wrong. That memory shaped my habits, my caution, my respect for the road. There's something especially eerie about accidents at night. The darkness hides details. The rain distorts everything. Flashing lights feel unreal, like they belong to another dimension. That night felt like we had briefly crossed into a place where the rules were different, where death was close enough to touch. Then we drove away and life went on. But for me, it never fully left. That image of the upside-down car has stayed with me for almost half a century. It's not something I dwell on constantly, but it's always there, tucked away in the back of my mind. A reminder of how fragile life is and how early we sometimes learn that lesson. That night was creepy, not because of ghosts or anything supernatural, but because it showed me reality in its rawest form. Sudden, unforgiving, silent once it's over. And even after all these years, I still remember it clearly. The rain, the lights, the car, and my dad telling me not to look, while knowing that some things, once seen, never really go away.
Pardon the interruption for just a moment. I hope these stories are keeping you on the edge of your seat tonight. If you're finding yourself drawn to these dark accounts, I'd love to have you join us. If you're new here, please consider hitting that subscribe button. We share new true horror stories every single day, and being part of the community is the only way to make sure you never miss a nightmare. A quick like and a comment also means a lot. It really helps the shadows spread a little further. But for now, let's get back to it. The darkness is calling.
I live in a pretty rural and secluded area, and when I was a kid and into my teen years, I used to go for walks all the time. It was one of the few ways to clear my head. There weren't many people around, no busy streets, no sidewalks full of strangers. Just long country roads, fields, trees, farms, and the quiet that comes with being far away from towns and cities. Walking felt safe. It felt normal. It felt like something I could do without worrying. Back then, I walked almost every day. At first, nothing ever felt off. The same roads, the same views, the same sense of calm. Cars were rare, and when they did pass, it was usually someone local heading to a farm or going home. You start to recognize patterns when you live somewhere like that. You know which trucks belong to which farms. You know which cars always drive a little too fast. Like you know when something is out of place. That's why one fall, I started noticing the same truck. At first, it didn't really bother me. In a rural area, it's normal to see the same vehicles again and again. People have routines. Farmers go back and forth between fields. Neighbors run errands at similar times. Seeing the same truck once or twice didn't mean anything. But then I kept seeing it. I noticed it on different days, different times. Sometimes it passed me going one way, sometimes the other. It wasn't always close, but it was familiar enough that I started registering it in my mind. I remember thinking, that truck again. Still, I brushed it off. I told myself I was overthinking it. As the weeks went on, though, that small sense of unease started to grow. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't panic. It was just a quiet awareness that this truck seemed to show up more often than it should. I couldn't even say for sure that it was following me. There was always plausible deniability. It was a country road. Maybe they lived nearby, maybe they worked on one of the farms. But something about it started to bother me. One afternoon I went out for another walk like I always did. It was fall, so the air was cool and the leaves were starting to turn. The road was quiet and I had my headphones on, completely in my own world. I was listening to music on my iPod, walking at an easy pace, not really paying attention to anything behind me. Then I noticed the truck. It was behind me on the road, moving slowly, slower than normal. At first I didn't think much of it. Maybe they were just driving carefully. Maybe the road was rough. I kept walking, trying not to focus on it. But the longer it stayed behind me, the more aware I became of it. It wasn't passing me. It wasn't turning off onto one of the many side roads that led to farms. It was just there, a short distance back, crawling along. I could hear the engine faintly, even through my music. That's when my brain started to spiral. The song I was listening to was American Pie, and it reached the line, "This'll be the day that I die." Normally that line wouldn't have meant much to me, but in that moment, with that truck behind me, it hit differently. It made my stomach tighten. My heart started beating faster. I told myself I was being stupid. It was just a song, just a coincidence, but anxiety doesn't care about logic. Once the thought entered my head, I couldn't shake it. I became hyper aware of everything. The sound of the engine, the distance between us, the fact that I was alone on a long, empty road. I decided to test it. I crossed the road and turned around to head back toward home. I tried to make it look casual, like I'd simply forgotten something, or changed my mind. I didn't run, I didn't panic, I just turned around. The truck followed. That's when the fear really hit. If it had been coincidence, the truck would have continued on its way. There were plenty of places it could have turned. Instead, it slowed, turned around, and stayed behind me again. The distance remained the same, not too close, not far enough to disappear. My chest felt tight, and my thoughts started racing. I knew this was a country road, and I also knew something important about it. There were lots of offshoot roads that led to farms, small dirt paths, long driveways, places where someone could turn off without being obvious. I decided I needed to get out of sight. I turned onto one of those offshoots and started jogging. Not full-on running, but fast enough that my body knew this wasn't just a walk anymore. I headed toward a nearby farm, my mind focused on one thing only: don't be seen. When I reached the farm, I moved behind a barn where I couldn't be seen from the road. My heart was pounding so hard, I could hear it in my ears. My hands were shaking. I crouched there, pressing myself as close to the structure as possible. I didn't see anyone at the farm. That made things worse. If someone had been around, I might have felt safer. Instead, it was just me, the barn, and the open fields. I turned off my music completely. The silence felt loud. Every small sound made me flinch. It was an iPod, and there was no service out there, no Wi-Fi, no way to call anyone. Even if I'd wanted to, I couldn't reach out for help. All I could do was wait. So I waited. I stayed completely still, barely breathing, listening. From where I was hiding, I could hear the truck. I could hear it driving back and forth on the road. It didn't just pass once and leave. It went back and forth, over and over. The sound would fade, then come back, fade again, then return. That went on for about 20 minutes. 20 minutes feels like a lifetime when you're scared. My legs cramped from staying still. My heart never slowed down. My mind ran through every worst-case scenario imaginable. I kept thinking, what if they get out? What if they walk into the farm? What if they saw me turn in here and are just waiting? I didn't move. I didn't peek around the corner. I stayed hidden. Eventually, the sound stopped. The truck finally left. I stayed where I was for a while longer just to be sure. I didn't trust the silence at first. When I finally moved, I realized how tense my body had been. Everything hurt. I felt shaky and exhausted. There were goats at the farm, wandering nearby. I remember standing there with them for a bit, watching them chew and move around like nothing in the world was wrong. It helped more than I expected. Their calm grounded me. It reminded me that for the moment I was safe. When I finally felt ready, I booked it home. I didn't walk. I didn't slow down. I ran the whole way, adrenaline pushing me forward until my house was in sight. When I got inside, I locked the door and just stood there, trying to catch my breath. After that day, things changed. I stopped walking alone. I didn't go out by myself anymore, not on those long roads, not in that quiet space I had once loved so much. The joy I used to feel on those walks was gone, replaced by a constant awareness of how vulnerable I had been. And I never saw the truck again. Not once. That part still bothers me. If it had been someone who lived nearby or worked at a farm, I should have seen it again eventually, but I didn't. It vanished from my life completely, just as suddenly as it had become a problem. To this day, I don't know what to make of it. I don't know if I freaked myself out. It's possible that my anxiety filled in the gaps, that coincidence and fear combined into something bigger than it really was. Maybe the driver was lost. Maybe they were just curious. Maybe they had nothing to do with me at all. But I also know this. The truck followed me when I turned around. It drove back and forth on that road for 20 minutes while I hid. That doesn't feel like nothing, doesn't feel harmless. Even now, when I think about it, my chest tightens the same way it did back then. The memory hasn't faded, it hasn't softened. It still feels close, like it could have ended very differently if I had made one wrong decision. What scares me the most is how quiet it all was. No confrontation, no words exchanged, no clear threat. Just a slow-moving truck on an empty road and the growing realization that I was alone and being watched. That kind of fear gets under your skin. It teaches you how quickly safety can disappear. I learned something that day, even if I still don't have answers. I learned to trust that feeling when something doesn't seem right. I learned that fear doesn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it creeps in slowly, giving you just enough time to act if you listen. And I learned that even places you've known your whole life, places that once felt safe and familiar, can change in an instant. That experience sticks with me. It comes back when I hear a slow-moving car behind me, when I walk alone in quiet places, when I think about how vulnerable we really are when we're isolated. I don't know what that situation truly was, and I may never know. But the fact that it still scares me tells me one thing. Something about it mattered. And I'm glad I trusted my instincts that day, even if I'll never know exactly what I was running from. I had just gotten home from my birthday dinner, still riding that quiet, content feeling you get after spending time with people you care about. The night felt normal in every possible way. I remember taking off my shoes, setting things down, letting my shoulders relax after the drive. Nothing about the moment hinted that anything was about to go wrong. Then I heard a crash. Not a small sound. Not a fender bender kind of noise. It was loud, violent, the kind of impact that makes your whole body tense before your brain has time to catch up. It echoed through the street, sharp and final, and I knew instantly that whatever had just happened was bad. I ran to the front window and looked outside. 2 cars had collided right out front, and it was immediately obvious that this wasn't a minor accident. And the vehicles were mangled in ways that don't happen at low speed. Metal was twisted. One car was pushed at an unnatural angle. Glass glittered across the road under the streetlights. Steam or smoke rose into the air, mixing with the cold night. My roommate heard it too and came running. We didn't stop to think. We didn't stop to weigh the risks or consider whether we were prepared for what we might see. We just ran outside, driven by that instinctive human urge to help when someone is in danger. The moment we stepped closer, the sounds hit us first. One of the drivers was screaming, not yelling, not shouting words, screaming in pure panic and pain over and over, begging for help. His voice was raw and desperate, the kind of sound that bypasses your ears and goes straight into your chest. He was pinned inside his car, trapped by twisted metal, unable to move. I remember locking eyes with him for a second and feeling this wave of helplessness wash over me. He was conscious, he was alive, he knew what was happening to him, and he was terrified. We tried to talk to him, to reassure him, even though we had no idea what to say. We told him help was coming. We told him to keep breathing. We told him he wasn't alone. I don't know if our words helped at all, but it felt unbearable to say nothing. Then I looked toward the other car. That's when everything changed. The second driver wasn't screaming. He wasn't moving. At first, my brain tried to make sense of what I was seeing and failed. It didn't register as human right away. It didn't fit into any category my mind was prepared for. He had suffered an internal decapitation. His head was no longer supported by a spine. It was just hanging, held to his body only by the skin of his neck. His head lolled unnaturally, disconnected in a way that made my stomach drop and my vision blur. There was no movement, no sound. Just the horrifying stillness of someone who was already gone. I had never seen anything like that in my life. The contrast between the two drivers was unbearable. One man screaming for help, fully aware, fully present in his pain. The other completely silent, his body already past saving. His injuries so severe they felt unreal. And then everything else hit me all at once. The smells, burning rubber, leaking fluids, hot metal. That sharp, sickening smell that comes with serious trauma, something you don't forget once you've experienced it. The air felt thick, heavy, like it was pressing into my lungs. Every breath felt wrong. The sights, twisted metal reflecting flashing lights from distant sirens, blood in places your brain doesn't expect it, shadows moving strangely across broken glass, the unnatural angles of bodies and vehicles that don't belong in the real world, the sounds, the screaming, the hiss of engines and damaged parts, people shouting instructions, someone crying. Somewhere nearby, a car alarm going off endlessly, adding this surreal, mechanical soundtrack to human suffering. It was overwhelming. My brain couldn't focus on one thing. Everything competed for attention at the same time, and I felt like I was standing inside a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. Time stopped making sense. Seconds stretched. Moments blurred together. I remember realizing suddenly that I was shaking. My hands trembled uncontrollably. My legs felt weak, like they might give out at any moment. I tried to stay grounded, to keep helping, but part of me wanted to run, to get away from the scene, to escape what I was seeing. Another part of me felt rooted to the ground, unable to leave, while someone was still screaming for help. Emergency services arrived quickly, though it didn't feel quick at the time. Police, firefighters, paramedics. They took control of the scene with practiced urgency. They moved us back, told us where to stand, asked us questions. Their calm professionalism was almost surreal compared to the chaos unfolding around them. As they worked, I caught glimpses of things I wish I could forget. The way they approached the second driver with a kind of quiet finality, knowing there was nothing to be done. And the way their movements changed depending on whether someone was alive or not. The difference between rescue and recovery, a distinction I'd never truly understood until that night. Eventually, there was nothing more for us to do. My roommate and I stood together, silent, watching from a distance as the professionals did their jobs. I felt numb, like my emotions had shut down, as a form of self-defense. I remember thinking, absurdly, that I was still wearing the clothes for my birthday dinner. That just hours ago I had been laughing, eating, celebrating another year of life. And now someone had lost theirs right outside my home. Later, when it was over, when the wreckage was cleared and the street was quiet again, the normal sounds of the night returned in a way that felt wrong. Too quiet, too ordinary. The world had moved on, or even though I felt permanently altered, I went inside and sat down, and that's when it really hit me. The images replayed in my mind over and over, the screaming, the hanging head, the smells, the feeling of standing there powerless. I couldn't stop thinking about the man who was trapped, screaming for help, and the other man who never got the chance to scream at all. Sleep didn't come easily that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I was back out there. I could hear the crash again. I could smell the wreckage. I could see the driver's head moving in that unnatural way. My body reacted as if it was happening all over again, heart racing, chest tight, breath shallow. In the days that followed, I noticed changes in myself. Loud noises made me jump. The sound of sirens made my stomach twist. I found myself replaying the scene when I was alone. My mind stuck on details I couldn't escape. I realized how unprepared I had been for that kind of trauma, how seeing death so suddenly and so violently leaves marks you don't expect. What stayed with me most wasn't just the visuals. It was the combination of everything happening at once. The human suffering layered on top of mechanical destruction. The contrast between life clinging desperately to the present and life already gone. The realization that one moment can divide existence so cleanly into before and after. That night changed how I see accidents. Before, they were things you heard about on the news. Statistics, headlines, something tragic, but distant. After that night, they became personal, real, immediate. I understood in a visceral way how fragile bodies are. It's how quickly everything can end, how little control we truly have. I also think about how random it all was. If I'd gotten home 5 minutes earlier or later, I might not have seen anything. If the crash had happened a few yards down the road, I might not have heard it. If I had decided to stay inside, someone else would have been the one to witness it. But I was there. And once you witness something like that, it becomes part of you. Even now, I can still recall the exact feeling of that night. The shock, the helplessness, the way my senses were overloaded all at once. It's not something that fades completely, no matter how much time passes. That birthday will always be tied to that crash in my memory, not because it ruined a celebration, but because it forced me to confront mortality in the most raw, unfiltered way possible. It showed me how quickly joy can turn into horror, how thin the line is between an ordinary night and a traumatic one. It also gave me a deep respect for first responders, for the people who step into scenes like that regularly and carry those images with them. Seeing it once was enough to leave a lasting mark on me. I can't imagine what it's like to see it over and over again. The combination of sights and sounds and smells from that night is something I will never forget. Not because I want to remember it, but because experiences like that don't ask permission to stay with you. They embed themselves in your mind, shaping how you see the world, reminding you that life can change in an instant. I walked out of my house that night thinking I was just going to help, and I walked back inside knowing I would never see things the same way again. When I was 4, my dad and I went on a hike. It wasn't supposed to be dangerous. It wasn't some extreme adventure. Just a walk in nature, the kind of thing parents do with their kids all the time. I remember the sense of being small and carried sometimes, and other times walking on my own. I remember trees, dirt paths, and the feeling of being somewhere quiet and open. What I remember most clearly is not what I saw. It's what I felt. At some point during that hike, something changed. The atmosphere shifted in a way I couldn't explain then and didn't fully understand until much later. Everything suddenly felt wrong. Not exciting wrong or surprising wrong, but deeply, fundamentally wrong. Like the ground beneath me wasn't stable anymore. Like the world had tilted slightly, and nothing was safe in the way it had been moments before. I remember feeling deeply unstable. That's the only word that really fits. I didn't feel curious or confused. I felt afraid in a way that didn't come from my own thoughts. It felt like something was pressing in on us, watching, following, waiting. I didn't know what it was, but I knew it was bad. At 4 years old, you don't analyze fear, you absorb it. And what I realize now, looking back as an adult, is that I wasn't just feeling my own fear, I was feeling my dad's. That's what made it so intense. My dad was a calm person, strong, grounded. The kind of adult who made things feel okay just by being there. As a child, I was used to him being steady, used to him being confident, used to him being the one who knew what to do. That day, something about him was different. I don't remember him saying, "I'm scared." I don't remember explanations or instructions. But I remember the feeling of being held by someone whose body was tense in a way I had never felt before. His muscles were tight, his movements were controlled but urgent, his breathing felt different, faster. He wasn't relaxed, he wasn't casual, he was afraid. And as a child, when the person you rely on for safety is afraid, the world becomes terrifying very quickly. I remember him picking me up and carrying me. I don't remember seeing whatever it was we were being followed by. I don't remember turning around and seeing an animal. My view was limited. I was small, held close, facing mostly his shoulder and the movement of the trail. But I remember his voice. That part is burned into me. I remember him yelling, not talking, not calling out, yelling. His voice was loud, sharp, and raw in a way I had never heard before. He was screaming words that didn't make sense to me at the time, but carried so much emotion that I felt them anyway. "Leave us alone. Leave us the fuck alone." I remember that phrase clearly, even though I didn't understand the language fully at 4 years old. I didn't know why he was yelling or who he was yelling at. I just knew it wasn't normal. It wasn't playful. It wasn't pretend. It was desperate. I remember clutching onto him as he carried me. I remember my body feeling tight, like I wanted to curl in on myself. I remember the sense that something was wrong behind us, even though I couldn't see it. I didn't need to see it. The fear was already there. As an adult, I now know what was happening. We were being stalked by a cougar. At the time, I didn't have that word. It's just I didn't know what a cougar was or what it meant to be stalked. But predators don't announce themselves. They don't charge immediately. They follow quietly. They watch. They wait for the right moment, and my dad knew. That's the part that makes this memory so powerful to me now. He knew exactly what was happening. He knew we were in danger. He knew he was carrying a small child. He knew that running could trigger an attack, but stopping wasn't an option either. He knew that whatever was behind us was assessing us. He was doing everything he could to keep me alive. At 4, I couldn't understand any of that. All I knew was that my dad's fear was unlike anything I had ever felt before. It wasn't panic in a chaotic sense. It was focused, controlled, but intense, like he was holding himself together by sheer will. I realize now that what unsettled me so deeply wasn't just the danger itself. It was the sudden shift in my understanding of safety. Up until that moment, the world had been relatively predictable. Adults were in control. Parents knew what to do. Nature was just trees and paths and fresh air. That experience cracked something open in my awareness. It showed me, without words, that there are things out there that are bigger, stronger, and more dangerous than us. And that sometimes, even the people we trust most are doing their best in situations where there are no good options. That's a heavy realization for a 4-year-old. I don't remember how it ended. I don't remember how long we were followed. I don't remember if the cougar eventually lost interest, or if we reached a safer area, or if other people appeared on the trail. Those details are gone. What remains is the emotional imprint, the fear, the instability, the sound of my dad's voice yelling into the woods. I remember that we survived. I remember that we made it out, and I remember that afterward, I didn't talk about it much. Kids often don't. We don't have the language, and we take cues from the adults around us. If they don't dwell on it, we don't either. Life moves on, but the body remembers. As I grew older, that memory surfaced in strange ways. A sudden discomfort in quiet woods, a heightened awareness of being watched, a sensitivity to changes in the emotional state of people around me, especially authority figures or caregivers. I became very attuned to fear in others, even when it wasn't spoken. Only much later did I connect the dots. I realized that the fear I remembered so clearly wasn't just my own. It was my dad's fear flowing straight into me, unfiltered. At 4 years old, I didn't have defenses against that. I didn't have emotional boundaries yet. I felt what he felt. That realization changed how I understood the memory. It wasn't just about a cougar. It was about witnessing vulnerability in someone I had never seen vulnerable before. It was about realizing at a very young age that safety isn't guaranteed, that love doesn't mean control, that even the strongest people can be afraid, and that sometimes survival depends on instinct, awareness, and a bit of luck. I've thought a lot about my dad in that moment, about what it must have felt like for him. Carrying his child while knowing a predator was nearby, knowing he couldn't outrun it, and knowing that any wrong move could have consequences he couldn't undo. Choosing to shout, to make himself seem larger, louder, more threatening than he actually was, all while holding on to me. That takes courage. Not the kind of courage people talk about in movies, but the quiet, desperate kind that shows up when there's no audience and no guarantee of success. I don't know if he remembers it the same way I do. Adults often process fear differently. He may remember the logistics, the decision-making, the outcome. I remember the feeling, the instability, the sense that the world had shifted. That experience taught me something very early, even if I couldn't articulate it until years later. Fear is contagious. So is calm. Children don't just listen to words. They read bodies. They absorb tone, tension, breath, posture. They feel what the adults around them feel, especially the ones they trust most. That day, my dad's fear taught me something real about danger, even though he never sat me down and explained it. It also taught me something about connection. The reason that fear stayed with me so strongly is because I was so closely connected to him in that moment. I was literally in his arms. I felt his heart racing, his muscles tightening, his voice vibrating through his chest. I wasn't observing fear from a distance. I was inside it with him. That kind of experience leaves a mark. As an adult, I'm grateful that I survived it. I'm grateful that my dad acted the way he did. I'm grateful that the cougar didn't attack. But I don't romanticize it. It was terrifying, it was real, and it shaped me in subtle ways. Even now, when I'm in nature, there's a part of me that stays alert, a part of me that listens carefully, a part of me that notices silence, movement, shifts in the environment. I don't panic, but I'm aware. That awareness feels old, like it's always been there. I think that's the legacy of that day. Not trauma in the sense of constant fear, but a deep respect for how quickly things can change, how fragile safety can be, how important instinct is, and how powerful it is to be attuned to the emotions of the people around you. That memory also softened something in me toward adults. As a child, you assume adults know everything. Experiences like this show you that they don't. They're just people, trying to protect what matters most with the information and tools they have at the time. My dad did exactly that. He didn't freeze. He didn't collapse, or he didn't pretend nothing was wrong. He acted. He carried me. He made noise. He tried to scare off something that could have killed us, and we lived. Even though I don't remember seeing the cougar, I don't need to. I remember the fear well enough. And I remember the sound of my dad's voice cutting through the woods, loud and desperate and protective, yelling into something I couldn't see but could feel. That was the moment I learned, without words, that the world can be dangerous, and that love sometimes looks like fear and yelling and holding on as tightly as you can. I was 4 years old, and that day, the world shifted, but we made it out. Several years ago, my boyfriend and I went on holiday to a Greek island. It was early in the season, just after places were beginning to open up again following the pandemic. Tourism was slowly returning, but it was still quiet compared to normal years. That calm, half-empty feeling was part of why we chose the trip. We wanted peace, space, and a break from everything the previous years had brought. The island itself was beautiful in that understated way that doesn't try to impress you all at once. Rocky hills, winding roads, white buildings, and the sea always visible somewhere in the distance. It felt old, solid, and timeless, like it had been there long before us and would be there long after. Our hotel reflected that same feeling. It wasn't a huge resort or a modern high-rise. It was more spread out, and with a main building and a few smaller annexes nearby. We were placed in one of those smaller annex buildings, set slightly apart from the main area. I think the annex only had 3 or 4 rooms total. At that time, we were the only couple staying in it. At first, that felt kind of nice. It was quiet, almost too quiet. No footsteps in the hallway, no doors opening and closing, no voices drifting through the walls, just us. The hum of insects outside, and then the distant sound of wind moving through the trees. During the day, it was peaceful. At night, it felt isolated, but not in a way that scared us, at least, not at first. We settled into a routine quickly. We'd spend mornings exploring the island, afternoons resting or reading, evenings having dinner in the main building or in nearby villages. Now, as that particular day had been unremarkable in the best possible way. We were back in our room in the afternoon, relaxing, doing nothing special. I don't remember exactly what we were doing. Maybe lying on the bed, maybe talking, maybe scrolling on our phones. It was one of those moments where time isn't marked by anything memorable. Then it happened. Without any warning at all, there was an almighty crash. Not a bang, not a rumble, a crash. The sound was so loud and so violent that my first thought was that a vehicle had hit the building. It honestly felt like a lorry had driven straight into the side of the annex. The room shook hard enough that we both felt it immediately, not just heard it. The walls vibrated. The floor reacted under us. It was physical. For a split second, neither of us moved. Then we both reacted at the same time. My heart started racing, and I remember that instant rush of adrenaline where your body is already preparing for something terrible before your mind has caught up. I felt that sharp, cold fear in my chest. The kind that doesn't ask questions first. The kind that just says something is wrong. We jumped up and ran outside. I half expected to see chaos, a crashed vehicle, broken walls, debris everywhere, something obvious and alarming. But when we stepped out into the sunlight, there was nothing. The annex was standing exactly as it had been before. No cracks, no visible damage, no broken windows, no dust cloud, no people shouting or running, no alarm bells. The area was completely calm. We looked around, confused. We walked around the side of the building, checking for damage. We looked at the ground. We looked at the walls. We looked toward the road, thinking maybe a car had veered off somewhere nearby. Nothing. No signs of an accident anywhere. That was when unease set in. Because sounds like that don't just happen for no reason. Something had hit, fallen, or moved with enough force to shake the building. And yet, there was no evidence of anything at all. We stood there for a moment, looking at each other, both clearly thinking the same thing. Did you feel that? Did you hear that the same way I did? Neither of us doubted it had happened. We both experienced it exactly the same way. Eventually, we decided to go to the front desk. The main building was only a short walk away. As we walked, I kept scanning the surroundings, expecting to notice something out of place. A fallen object, a cracked wall, someone reacting. But everything looked normal. Guests were lounging around. Staff were going about their business. No one seemed disturbed. At the front desk, we explained what had happened. We described the crash, how loud it was, how the room had shaken, how it felt like something had hit the building. I expected concern, maybe surprise, maybe a quick call to maintenance, something. Instead, the receptionist barely reacted. She smiled politely and said, almost casually, "Oh yes, that would have been a mild earthquake tremor. It happens all the time." That was it. No alarm, no urgency, no sense that anything unusual had occurred. I remember just staring at her for a moment, trying to process that answer. An earthquake? She said it like she was talking about a passing cloud or a brief gust of wind, like it was nothing worth mentioning. We must have looked shocked. These because she added something along the lines of it being very common in that region. especially on islands and in mountainous areas. Small tremors happen frequently, she said. Most people barely notice them. Sometimes they feel stronger depending on where you are and how the building reacts. She went back to whatever she had been doing, completely unfazed. We thanked her and walked back to the annex, still trying to wrap our heads around it. An earthquake. It wasn't something we had even considered. We weren't in a place we mentally associated with earthquakes, even though logically it made sense. Greece is in a seismically active region. The island was mountainous, the buildings were old. Of course, tremors could happen. But knowing that didn't immediately make the experience feel less unsettling. As we walked back, and I kept replaying the moment in my mind, the sound, the force, the way the room shook. It hadn't felt like something rolling or rumbling beneath us. It had felt like an impact, like something coming from above or from the side, not from below. But the receptionist's explanation made me think differently about that too. She said the structure of the building could make the vibration feel like it came from anywhere. Depending on how the shock waves traveled, how the walls and roof reacted, it could sound and feel like something hit the building, even if the movement came from the ground. That made sense intellectually. Emotionally, it still felt strange. When we got back into the room, everything was normal. Nothing had fallen over. Nothing had shifted. No cracks had appeared. It was as if nothing had happened at all. If we hadn't both been there to experience it, I might have questioned my own memory. That evening we talked about it a lot. We joked about it a little, trying to shake off the lingering tension. But underneath the jokes, there was a shared sense of vulnerability, the realization that something powerful had happened without warning and without our control. Earthquakes are unsettling in a unique way. You can prepare for storms. You can watch the sky, check the forecast, see them coming. You can prepare for heavy rain, wind, even extreme heat. But earthquakes don't announce themselves. There's no countdown, no visible sign. The ground you trust to be solid simply moves. Now, that's a hard thing for the human brain to accept. That night I slept lightly. Every small sound made me tense. The building creaking, wind brushing against the walls. Even my boyfriend shifting in bed made my heart jump for a moment. I kept expecting another crash, another violent shake. Nothing else happened. The rest of the trip passed without incident. No more tremors that we noticed, no strange sounds, no further shaking. Life returned to its gentle holiday rhythm. But that one moment stayed with me. What struck me most was how calm everyone else was about it. The staff, the locals, even other guests. When we mentioned it casually, barely reacted. To them, it was normal. Just part of living in that place. Something you notice, acknowledge, and then move on from. For us, coming from somewhere where earthquakes are rare or non-existent, it felt significant. It felt dramatic. It felt dangerous. That difference in perception stuck with me. It made me think about how much our sense of safety depends on what we're used to. What feels terrifying to one person can feel routine to another. A sound that makes your heart race might barely register to someone who's heard it many times before. It also made me think back to other unexplained crashes and impacts I've heard about or experienced, where no clear cause was found. How often people jump to strange conclusions because the explanation isn't obvious right away. How sometimes the answer really is something natural but unfamiliar. When you're in a mountainous region, especially one known for seismic activity. Strange sounds and vibrations don't always come from above. They don't always come from trees, branches, or objects falling. Sometimes they come from the earth itself, shifting slightly, or reminding you that it's not as stable as you assume. That doesn't make it any less frightening in the moment. Even knowing it was a mild earthquake didn't erase the feeling of that crash. The suddenness of it, the force, the way it made us run outside, hearts pounding, expecting to see disaster. What it did do was give the experience a shape, a name, a reason. And that matters, because when something has no explanation at all, it tends to linger in your mind in a more disturbing way. It becomes a question mark that never quite goes away. In this case, at least, there was an answer. One that fit the location, one that fit the reaction of the building, one that explained why there was no visible damage. Even now, when I think back to it, I can still feel that moment of shock, that instant where the world felt unstable. But I can also remember the receptionist's calm voice, treating it as nothing out of the ordinary. That contrast is what really stayed with me. The difference between how something feels when you don't understand it and how it feels once you do. So whenever I hear stories about sudden crashes, unexplained impacts, or buildings shaking without obvious cause, my mind goes back to that day on the island, to that quiet annex, to that single violent moment that came and went without leaving a mark. And I always think the same thing. If you're in a mountainous or seismically active area, it might not be something falling at all. Sometimes it's the ground itself reminding you that it moves too, even when you can't see it. This happened late at night, during one of those moments when your mind is quiet, but not yet asleep. I was already in bed, lights off, scrolling through Reddit on my phone, killing time before finally putting it down and going to sleep. The house was calm. Nothing felt off. Just the steady sound of rain tapping against the windows and the low, constant movement of wind outside. Then, without any warning at all, there was a massive crash directly above me. It wasn't a subtle sound. It wasn't something I could brush off as the house settling or a normal storm noise. It was a deep, heavy, thudding impact. The kind of sound that makes your body react before your mind even has time to think. It sounded exactly like something big had slammed into the roof, like a tree or a huge branch falling straight down onto the house. I felt it too, where there was a slight vibration, just enough that I could feel it through the bed, through the walls. Not strong enough to knock anything over, but strong enough to confirm that whatever it was, it had weight. It felt like the house had been hit. My heart started racing immediately. For a few seconds, I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, my phone forgotten in my hand. My brain went into overdrive, trying to figure out what could have caused something like that. The sound was so sudden and so loud that it didn't feel natural. It felt invasive, like something had crossed a boundary. Outside, the storm continued. There was rain and wind, but nothing extreme. No howling gusts, no violent shaking of the house. Just a steady, windy rainstorm. Importantly, there was no thunder and no lightning. None before the crash. None after. Yet no flashes of light. No rumbling in the distance, just rain. My first thought was a tree branch. We have a lot of big old trees around the house. tall ones, thick ones, the kind that lose branches from time to time. During storms, it's not unusual for a branch to come down, so that explanation made sense. At least on the surface, wind plus rain plus old trees equals falling branches. But even as I told myself that, something didn't quite sit right. If a branch had fallen, I would expect to hear more than just one sound. A branch falling usually makes a series of noises, a crack, a scrape, a rolling or sliding sound as it comes down and hits the ground. This was just one single heavy impact, one massive thud, and then nothing. Still, it was the only explanation that felt even remotely reasonable. I didn't get out of bed right away. I stayed there for a while, listening, waiting to hear something else, and another crash. A branch sliding off the roof, leaves scraping against the siding. Anything that would confirm my theory. But the storm just kept going like normal. Rain, wind, no follow-up sounds, no chaos outside. Eventually, I put my phone down and tried to sleep, though sleep is a generous word for what I actually did. I drifted in and out, my mind replaying the sound over and over, imagining different scenarios. Each time the wind gusted a little harder, my body tensed, expecting another impact. Nothing else happened that night. By morning, the storm had passed. Daylight came, and with it, a sense that things should finally make sense. Daylight usually does that. It turns the unknown into something obvious. Fear shrinks under sunlight. At least, that's how it usually works. The first thing we did was go outside. We checked the yard carefully, expecting to find a fallen branch, broken limbs, or debris scattered somewhere near the house. We walked the perimeter slowly, looking under trees, near the foundation around the driveway. There was nothing. No branches, no broken wood, no leaves or bark piled up in a way that suggested something had fallen recently. That was strange, but not impossible. Maybe the branch had fallen somewhere less obvious. Maybe it had bounced or rolled farther away. So we kept looking. Around the sides of the house, behind it, near neighboring yards, still nothing. Then we looked up. We examined the roof from the ground as best we could. No damaged shingles, no dents, no obvious impact marks. Nothing out of place, wherein the roof looked exactly the same as it always did. At that point, the unease crept back in. If something big enough to shake the house had fallen onto the roof, there should have been some kind of sign, a broken shingle, a crack, something. But there was nothing. So we checked inside. We went up into the attic thinking maybe something had fallen inside instead. A shelf tipping over, a heavy box shifting and dropping, something structural giving way. The attic was completely normal. Everything was where it should be. No fallen items, no disturbed dust, no signs of movement. We checked the rest of the house too. Every room, closets, the garage, anywhere something heavy could have fallen. Nothing was broken. Nothing was out of place. Nothing explained the sound or the vibration I had felt. At that point, and the logical explanation started to fall apart. The only other thing that made sense, at least technically, was thunder. But that didn't sit right either. There had been no thunder at all during the storm. No rumbling before or after. No lightning flashes. And even if there had been a single thunderclap, it would be incredibly strange for it to be so localized, so perfectly positioned above my head, and so strong that it felt like a physical impact on the house. Thunder usually rolls. It echoes. It has depth and distance to it. This sound didn't. It was sharp, immediate, solid, like something hit the roof and stopped. I kept going back to that detail. It didn't sound like something in the sky. It sounded like something falling. But falling from where? We checked everything. The roof, the attic, the yard, the trees, the garage. Nate said there was simply no evidence of anything that could have caused that kind of crash. That's when the questions started to get uncomfortable. If it wasn't a branch, and it wasn't thunder, then what was it? Could it have been wind pressure? A sudden shift in air that slammed against the roof just right? That explanation felt weak. Wind makes noise. It howls, it rattles. It doesn't usually produce a single explosive thud that feels like impact. Could it have been something structural? A beam settling? But houses settle gradually. They creak. They pop. They don't suddenly slam with enough force to vibrate the whole structure. The more I thought about it, the less sense it made. What bothered me most was how real it felt. This wasn't something I imagined. I wasn't half asleep. I wasn't dreaming. I was awake, scrolling on my phone. My senses were engaged. I felt the vibration. I heard the sound clearly. It wasn't vague or distant. It was right there. And yet, it left no trace. That's the part that stuck with me. When something physical happens, it usually leaves evidence. Even small things leave signs. But this didn't. It was as if whatever caused the crash had existed for only a moment and then vanished completely. I kept replaying the sound in my head, trying to compare it to other things I'd heard in my life. Fallen trees, thunder, construction noise, heavy objects dropping. None of them matched perfectly. This was too clean, too singular, too final. Over time, I talked to other people about it. Some suggested it really was thunder. Just a rare, unusually loud thunderclap. Others said it could have been a microburst of wind. Some suggested something fell from the roof and bounced away unnoticed. All of those explanations were possible, technically, but none of them fully satisfied me. Because we looked everywhere, and there was nothing. What made it more unsettling was how the sound seemed so intentional, so centered. It wasn't off to one side of the house. It wasn't distant. It was directly above me, as if whatever caused it had chosen that exact spot. I don't like leaning into supernatural explanations. I'm not someone who jumps straight to that. I want things to make sense. I want causes and effects to line up neatly, but sometimes they don't. This was one of those times. It didn't turn into anything else. No follow-up events, no repeated crashes, no damage discovered later. Life went on normally, but the memory stayed. Even now, and when there's a storm at night and I hear a loud noise, my body reacts instantly. My heart jumps. I tense up. I listen more carefully than I used to. That single unexplained moment rewired something in me because it showed me how fragile certainty is. We like to believe that every sound has a clear source. Every event has an explanation we can eventually find. Most of the time, that's true. But every once in a while, something happens that doesn't fit neatly into a category. Something that leaves you standing there the next day, looking around, asking yourself how that could have happened at all. That's what this was. A single, massive crash. A clear, physical sensation, and no evidence whatsoever. I don't claim to know what caused it. I don't have a dramatic conclusion. I don't have an answer that ties it all together. All I have is the experience itself and the lingering discomfort of not knowing. Was it thunder? Maybe. Was it a branch that somehow left no trace? Possibly. Was it something else entirely? I honestly don't know. What I do know is that it was real enough to scare me, solid enough to shake the house, and strange enough to stay in my mind long after the storm had passed. Sometimes the most unsettling experiences aren't the ones where something obviously terrifying happens. They're the ones where something happens once, without warning, without explanation, and without leaving anything behind. Because those are the ones you can never fully put to rest. They don't give you answers. They just leave you with the question. This is one of the most frightening experiences of my life. Not because of something sudden or violent, but because of how quietly and quickly it took control, and how powerless I felt while it was happening. It's the kind of fear that doesn't scream at you right away. It creeps in slowly, and by the time you realize how bad it is, you're already in the middle of it, desperately trying to protect the person you love most. My daughter was 18 at the time. She has epilepsy, and by then we had already been living with that reality for years. Seizures, medications, doctor visits, medication changes, side effects. All of it had become part of our normal life. I won't say we were ever fully comfortable with it, but we were experienced. We knew the warning signs. We knew what to watch for. We knew how to respond when something wasn't right. Or at least we thought we did. Her neurologist decided to switch her to a new medication. On paper, it made sense. It was supposed to help control her seizures better. The risks were explained in the usual clinical way, side effects listed calmly, none of them sounding alarming enough to make us hesitate. We trusted the process. We trusted the doctors. We trusted that if something went wrong, we'd notice it. The first few days seemed fine. She took the medication as prescribed. She didn't complain about anything unusual. No headaches, no dizziness, no obvious mood changes. Life went on normally. I checked in with her casually at first, asking how she felt, making sure she was okay. She said she was fine. Then, around day 9, things began to shift. At first, it was subtle, due to your small comments that made me pause, but not enough to panic. She said she was having trouble sleeping. She seemed distracted, like she was listening for something. I assumed stress. She was 18 after all. Between school, life changes, and managing epilepsy, stress wasn't unusual. Then she mentioned hearing a clock ticking in the walls. She said it so casually, like it was an annoyance rather than something terrifying. She asked if I heard it too. I stopped what I was doing and listened. The house was quiet. No ticking, no hidden clock, no mechanical sound. I told her I didn't hear anything. She frowned, confused, and said it was definitely there. That it was loud, constant, coming from inside the walls. That was the first moment my stomach dropped. Still, I tried to stay calm. I told myself there had to be a rational explanation. Maybe plumbing, maybe electrical noise, maybe anxiety. I didn't want to scare her by reacting too strongly. I didn't want to plant fear in her mind if this was something harmless. But then the voices started. She didn't tell me right away. When she finally did, it was hesitant, like she was testing the words before letting them fully out. She said she was hearing voices, not just sounds, not just whispers, but voices that were speaking directly to her. They were telling her to harm herself. Writing that sentence still makes my chest tighten. As a parent, there is no preparation for hearing that, no mental rehearsal, no calm response that comes naturally. Everything inside you wants to panic, to grab them, to make it stop immediately. But I also knew that how I reacted mattered. I needed to keep her calm. I needed to keep her safe. Like, I asked her questions carefully. I asked what the voices were saying, how often she heard them, whether she felt like she might act on what they were telling her. She was scared, confused. She knew something was wrong, but she didn't understand why it was happening. Neither did I. What terrified me most was how fast it all unfolded. 9 days. That was all it took for a medication meant to help her to completely distort her reality. Watching your child slip into something that looks like madness is a special kind of horror. It feels unreal, like you're watching a nightmare through a window, unable to reach in and pull them out. I didn't hesitate. I took her straight to the emergency room. The ride there felt endless. I kept glancing at her, watching her face, her eyes, her reactions. She looked like herself, and yet not. Like she was there and not there at the same time. She kept glancing around, listening to things I couldn't hear. I tried to keep talking, to anchor her to me, to the moment, to reality. At the ER, everything moved fast and slow at the same time. Doctors asked questions, nurses took notes. They asked about medications, dosage, timing. When I mentioned the new epilepsy medication and the timeline, I could see the shift in their expressions. Concern, recognition, understanding. They admitted her. She spent a long weekend in the psychiatric ward of the hospital. Those days are burned into my memory. Walking through those locked doors felt like crossing into another world. The ward was quiet in a way that didn't feel peaceful. It felt controlled, heavy. The kind of quiet that comes from people being watched, monitored, managed. And the rooms were sparse. The routines were strict. Everything was designed for safety, but none of it felt comforting. Seeing my daughter there broke my heart. She was 18, still so young, still someone who should have been worrying about normal things, like friends, plans, the future. Instead, she was in a psychiatric ward because a medication had hijacked her brain and turned it against her. I stayed as close as I could. I talked to her. I reassured her. I reminded her who she was, where she was, that she was safe. I told her over and over that this wasn't her fault, that she wasn't broken, that this was something happening to her, not something she was choosing. But inside, I was terrified. There is a special kind of fear that comes from not knowing if your child will come back to you the same way. I didn't know when the hallucinations would stop. I didn't know if they would stop. I didn't know if the damage was temporary or permanent. I didn't know if this would become her new reality. Every parent has moments of fear, but this was different. This was watching her mind unravel in front of me and having no control over it. The doctors eventually stopped the medication. They monitored her closely. They reassured me that this kind of reaction, while rare, was possible. That some medications can trigger severe psychiatric side effects, especially in young people. That the brain can react in unpredictable ways. Even with those explanations, the waiting was unbearable. I watched her closely, looking for signs of improvement. Listening carefully when she spoke. Watching her eyes, her body language, her tone. Every time she paused, like every time she glanced around, my heart jumped. Slowly, the hallucinations faded. The ticking stopped. The voices went quiet. She started to sound like herself again. Not all at once, but gradually, like someone waking up from a bad dream and slowly realizing it's over. The fear in her eyes softened. Her thoughts became clearer. She could explain what she had been experiencing without sounding lost in it anymore. When she was discharged, I felt relief so intense it almost knocked me over. And then the exhaustion hit. Once the medication was out of her system, she returned to normal, completely normal. The daughter I knew, the daughter I recognized, the daughter who laughed, thought clearly, and existed fully in the real world again. There were no lingering symptoms, no continued voices, no hallucinations. It was over. But it also wasn't, because something changed in me permanently. Even though she has been fine ever since, even though we now know exactly what caused it, even though doctors reassured us that the reaction was medication-induced and reversible, the fear never fully left. It settled into the background of my life, quiet but constant. Now, whenever her medications are adjusted, I get nervous. Not just mildly concerned, but deeply, instinctively alert. I watch her closely. I listen carefully to how she speaks. I notice small changes in mood, sleep, attention. I ask questions. Probably too many questions. I check in more often than I used to. I become super vigilant. I know some people might say that's overprotective, that I should trust the doctors, that lightning doesn't strike twice. But once you've watched your child descend into something that looks like madness because of a pill they were supposed to take for their health, it's impossible not to be cautious. I'm not just watching for seizures anymore. I'm watching for changes in her mind. I'm watching for signs that something isn't right. That reality might be slipping again, that the voices might return, that the ticking might start again. That look in her eyes that tells me she's hearing something I can't. I think about how easily this could have gone differently. What if she hadn't told me what she was hearing? What if she had been embarrassed or afraid? What if I dismissed it as stress or imagination? What if I'd waited another day or two before taking her to the hospital? Those questions haunt me. The voices were telling her to harm herself. That's not something you gamble with. That's not something you wait and see about. The thought of what could have happened if I hadn't acted immediately makes my stomach twist. This experience taught me something important and terrifying. The brain is fragile. We like to think of mental health crises as something separate, something caused by trauma or environment or long-term illness. But sometimes it can be triggered chemically, suddenly, by something as simple as a medication adjustment. The line between stability and chaos can be thinner than we want to believe. It also taught me how important it is to listen. If someone tells you they're hearing things that aren't there, believe them. If someone says something feels wrong, take it seriously. Especially when it comes to young people and medication changes, especially when the brain is involved. I am endlessly grateful that she came back to herself. Grateful that the medication was stopped in time. Grateful that the hospital took it seriously. Grateful that she is here, healthy, and living her life. But I will never forget those days. I will never forget the sound of her telling me about the voices. I will never forget walking into the psychiatric ward. I will never forget the fear of not knowing if she would come back. That kind of fear rewires you too. Now, when people talk casually about medication changes or dismiss side effects as rare, I think about my daughter. I think about 9 days. I think about how quickly everything unraveled. I think about how real it all felt to her. And I stay alert. Because being vigilant is a small price to pay compared to the alternative. And she's been fine ever since. And I hope with everything in me that she always will be. But if there's one thing this experience taught me, it's that love sometimes looks like fear. It looks like watching closely, It looks like stepping in early. It looks like refusing to ignore small signs because you know how big they can become. I don't take her stability for granted anymore. Every clear day feels like a gift. And every time her medications are adjusted, I hold my breath just a little, watch just a little closer, and remind myself that being cautious isn't weakness, it's love. I went to Mexico with my boyfriend's family, and at the time it was supposed to be an easy, exciting trip, a vacation, something to look forward to. I had traveled before, but this felt different because it wasn't just me, it was a group trip, 6 of us all together. And there's a false sense of safety that comes with numbers. You assume that being surrounded by people automatically protects you. You assume danger won't bother trying. That assumption almost cost me my passport. We had just landed and gone through customs. The airport was crowded in that specific way international airports always are, loud with overlapping voices, rolling suitcases, announcements echoing off high ceilings. Everything smelled faintly of disinfectant and recycled air. I remember feeling tired but relieved. Customs can be stressful, and once you're through it, your body relaxes a little. I had a small backpack with me, nothing fancy, just something practical. Since I had to keep pulling my passport out over and over, I'd been keeping it in the front pocket for easy access. I'm careful with important documents, always have been. I know exactly where they are at all times. That front pocket had been zipped, unzipped, checked, re-zipped. I was certain of it. Customs checked my bag. I took things out, put them back, zipped it up. I remember the motion clearly. Muscle memory. Everything cleared, without issue. We walked outside to the area where the shuttle companies waited. Each company had its own little cluster of people holding signs, calling out names, trying to organize travelers into vans and buses. The air outside felt warmer and heavier, and the noise shifted from echoing airport chaos to open-air confusion. Our group gathered at the shuttle company we were told to meet. I was standing at the back of the group, not really paying attention to anything in particular, just waiting, letting my shoulders drop, looking around casually. That's when he came up behind me. At first, I didn't even see him. I felt him. He stood too close, uncomfortably close. The kind of close where your body reacts before your brain does. I could feel the heat of another person behind me, closer than a stranger ever needs to be. My shoulders stiffened instantly. He stepped into my peripheral vision, a man I didn't recognize. Nothing about him screamed criminal in an obvious way. He wasn't wearing anything threatening. He didn't look aggressive. But something was wrong, deeply wrong, and he started asking random questions. Not directly to me, but to the group. Harmless-sounding questions. Where we were going, how long we were staying, who we were traveling with. Questions designed to pull attention toward him. Questions designed to distract. I answered nothing. The moment he spoke, my body went into red alert. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up so sharply it felt electric. My stomach dropped. My chest tightened. This wasn't anxiety. This wasn't nerves. This was instinct. There was a voice in the back of my head. Not loud, not panicked, calm, clear. Move your backpack, now. I didn't question it. I didn't analyze it. I didn't tell myself I was being dramatic. I just did it. I reached back, slid my backpack straps off my shoulders, and pulled it around to the front of my chest. And that's when I saw it. The rear of the front pocket was unzipped, wide enough to reach into. For a split second, my brain refused to accept what my eyes were seeing. That zipper had been closed. I was sure of it. I had just been through customs. I had physically handled that pocket. There was no chance it had worked itself open. My heart slammed into my ribs. I shoved my hand into the pocket immediately, fingers shaking as they searched for the familiar shape. When I felt my passport still there, intact, untouched, I almost cried from relief. My knees felt weak. My mouth went dry. I looked up. The man was already walking away, not hurried, not running, just slipping back into the crowd, like he had never been there at all. No eye contact, no reaction, no confrontation, just gone. That's when it really hit me. He had been close enough to unzip my bag without me feeling it, looking close enough to do it smoothly, confident enough to assume I wouldn't notice until it was too late. And the second I moved my bag to the front, the second I disrupted his plan, he disappeared. If I hadn't listened to that voice, my passport would have been gone. And losing a passport in a foreign country isn't just inconvenient, it's a nightmare. It means embassy visits, police reports, delays, missed flights, being stranded, being separated from your group, being vulnerable in ways you don't think about until it happens. I stood there frozen for a moment, trying to calm my breathing. Nobody else in my group noticed anything. They were still chatting, laughing, talking about the hotel, about food, about the trip ahead. From the outside, nothing unusual had happened. But inside my body, everything was screaming. I told them what had just happened. The mood shifted instantly. Faces changed. Conversations stopped. Suddenly, everyone was scanning the crowd, pulling bags closer, checking zippers, reassessing the space around us. That sense of safety that comes with being in a group cracked just a little, and I kept thinking about how quiet it had all been. No shouting, no grabbing, no dramatic confrontation. Just a man using proximity, distraction, and confidence. Just someone who knew exactly what he was doing. That scared me, more than if he had been aggressive. Because aggression is obvious. This was surgical. The thing that stays with me the most is how my body reacted before my mind did. I didn't see his hands. I didn't feel the zipper move. I didn't catch him in the act. My body simply knew something was wrong and told me to act. Yes, man, it was right. I think about how many times people are taught to ignore that feeling, to be polite, to not make a scene, to assume the best, to tell themselves they're overreacting, especially women, especially in public places, especially when nothing bad has technically happened yet. If I had done that, I would have paid for it. That moment taught me something I carry with me everywhere now. Instinct isn't paranoia, it's information. It's your brain processing thousands of tiny signals you don't consciously register and coming to a conclusion faster than words can form. And sometimes it saves you. I don't know what would have happened if my passport had been taken. I don't know how long it would have taken me to realize. I don't know if the man would have targeted someone else in the group next. I don't know how many other people he succeeded with that day. What I do know is that for a few seconds, I was one zipper away from a very bad situation. And I walked away because I listened to myself. Even now, thinking about it makes my stomach twist. Not because something terrible happened, but because something terrible almost did. Because I can picture how easily it could have gone the other way. Because I understand now how quiet danger can be. It doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just stands too close and waits for you not to notice. And sometimes the only thing between you and disaster is whether you listen to that small, steady voice telling you to move. This is one of those memories that doesn't fade with time, doesn't soften or turn into a story you can tell lightly. It stays exactly where it happened, lodged in your body as much as your mind, and it resurfaces in quiet moments when you least expect it. I was 14. There was a party, one of those casual adult gatherings where kids are technically around but not really part of what's going on. Music playing, people drinking, laughing, talking over each other. It felt normal at first, familiar, safe in the way things often do when they involve family and people you're told you can trust. One of my mom's male friends was there. He was drunk. At the time, I didn't think much of that either. Adults drank at parties. That was just part of the background noise of growing up. At some point, I found myself outside and away from the main group. It was darker there, quieter, removed from the lights and voices. I don't remember how exactly it happened, whether I stepped away for air or was just moving through the space. What I remember clearly is that suddenly, I wasn't alone anymore. He cornered me. There was no dramatic buildup, no obvious threat at first. Just the sudden realization that I was blocked in, that someone much older, much bigger, and very drunk was too close to me in a place where no one else could see or hear clearly. That awareness hit me all at once, sharp and sickening. Then he pulled me in. The hug was awful, not comforting, not friendly, not appropriate in any way. It was tight, invasive, and wrong. His body pressed against mine, holding me there longer than any normal hug ever would. I remember freezing for a split second, my brain scrambling to understand what was happening. Then he started talking. He told me how beautiful I was. He said it in that way that makes your skin crawl. Not like a compliment, but like a claim. His voice was too close to my ear. His breath smelled of alcohol. Every instinct in my body was screaming that this was not safe. That feeling hit me like a wave. It wasn't a thought. It wasn't a rational conclusion. It was pure, physical terror. A horrific, full-body sensation that something was very wrong and that I needed to get out immediately. My chest tightened. My stomach dropped. My limbs felt electric, like they were already preparing to run. I pushed him away. I don't remember what I said, if I said anything at all. I just remember breaking free and leaving as fast as I could. I ran back toward the light, toward people, toward noise, toward anywhere that wasn't there. My heart was pounding so hard, it felt like it might burst. I didn't look back. I got away. And that's where the story should end. That should be the part where there's relief, where the danger is over and everything is okay again. But it didn't end there. What stayed with me wasn't just what he did. It was the feeling, that gut-deep animal instinct telling me to run, that knowledge that if I hadn't listened to it, if I had hesitated even a few seconds longer, something much worse could have happened. That what if has followed me ever since. What if I hadn't pushed him away? What if I'd frozen longer? What if I tried to be polite? What if I had worried about making a scene? Those questions don't have answers, and that's part of what makes them so haunting. And what hurts even more is what came after. I didn't tell my mom. Not then, not for a long time. I carried it silently, convincing myself that maybe I'd misunderstood. Maybe he was just drunk and harmless. Maybe I was overreacting. Somewhere along the way, I internalized the idea that I was partly at fault, that maybe I'd done something wrong by being there, by existing, by not preventing it somehow. That kind of thinking doesn't come out of nowhere. It's taught, it's reinforced by how often girls are told to be careful, to manage men's behavior, to avoid situations, rather than expect adults to behave appropriately. At 14, I didn't have the language or confidence to name what had happened as a violation. I just knew it felt wrong and terrifying. So instead of telling anyone, I adapted. I made sure I was never around him. And I stayed in groups. I avoided spaces where he might be. I altered my behavior quietly, without explanation, like it was my responsibility to manage the risk. I learned how to scan rooms, how to keep track of where certain people were, how to leave situations early if my instincts flared up again. That's a heavy thing to learn so young. Years later, when I was an adult, I finally told my mom. By then, the words came easier, but they still hurt to say. I worried about how she would react, whether she would feel guilty, whether she would doubt me, but she believed me. They aren't friends anymore. That relationship ended as it should have. Still, the damage was already done. That feeling from that night never fully left me. Even though it was a good instinct, even though it protected me, it's tied to fear in a way that's hard to untangle. Sometimes it comes back unexpectedly. A certain tone of voice, a dark space, someone standing too close, and suddenly my body remembers before my mind does. What I've come to understand, slowly and painfully, is this. I was not at fault. Not for being there. Not for being 14. Not for existing in my body. Not for trusting that adults would behave appropriately. The responsibility was his. Fully. Completely. No exceptions. Listening to that instinct saved me. That reaction wasn't weakness or overreaction. It was my nervous system doing exactly what it was supposed to do in the face of danger. The fact that it still echoes in my body doesn't mean I did something wrong. It means something wrong was done to me. I wish I could go back and tell that 14-year-old that she did the right thing. That pushing him away and running was brave. That staying silent afterward wasn't a failure, but a survival strategy born out of fear and confusion. That none of this was her fault. That moment changed how I see the world. It taught me that danger doesn't always look like a stranger in a dark alley. Sometimes it looks like a familiar adult at a party. Someone you're supposed to trust. Someone who abuses proximity and alcohol and silence. It also taught me to respect my instincts. That feeling, as terrifying as it was real. It was information. And it's okay that it still affects me. Trauma doesn't disappear just because the worst didn't happen. Near misses still leave scars. I survived that moment because I listened to myself. And even though the memory still haunts me, and I try to remind myself of this one truth whenever it comes back. I got out, I protected myself, and none of it was my fault. Back in high school, there was this spoiled, rich, cool kid everyone knew. He had money, confidence, and a brand new T-top car that he loved showing off. It was loud, flashy, and always surrounded by people. He was the kind of guy who thought nothing bad could ever happen to him. The kind who believed rules were for other people. One night there was a kegger out in the middle of nowhere. The kind of party that only happens when someone's parents are gone and word spreads fast. A lot of people showed up. Music was blasting. Everyone was drinking. Some were probably high too. It was messy, loud, and reckless in the way only teenage parties can be. When it was time to leave, the cool kid was completely shit-faced drunk. He was also showing off, like always. He had 3 other people crammed into that car with him, 4 people total. No one was wearing seatbelts. At that age, seatbelts felt optional, like something adults worried about, not something that mattered when you were young and invincible. They pulled onto a dark country road. It was one of those roads that looks straight for a bit and then curves suddenly, with no street lights and trees pressed in close on both sides. The kind of road locals know to be careful on, but outsiders underestimate. He floored it anyway. People later said he was doing around 110 miles an hour, maybe more. The engine screaming, tires barely gripping the pavement, everyone inside probably laughing or screaming or both. Then the road curved right. He didn't. The car went straight off the road. The impact was catastrophic. The T-top didn't protect them. The car tore through brush and trees, breaking apart as it went. Makes with no seat belts, bodies were thrown violently. Metal twisted. Glass shattered. The force was unimaginable. 3 people died. The only survivor was a girl who'd been ejected from the car. She didn't survive because she landed safely or rolled away. She survived because she was impaled by a tree branch, 30 feet off the ground. The branch went through her body and held her there, suspended above the forest floor. That was the only reason she didn't bleed out. The rescue team couldn't even reach her easily. The wreck was deep in the woods, far from the road, in darkness. They had to bring ladders out into the trees to get to her. It took hours. She was stuck there all night, injured, terrified, in shock, unable to move, waiting while rescuers figured out how to save her without killing her in the process. She lived, but lived doesn't mean she was okay. News spread fast at school. By morning, everyone knew something awful had happened. Names circulated, rumors mixed with facts. People tried to piece together who was in the car, who survived, who didn't. Teachers looked shaken. Administrators spoke in hushed voices. The building felt different that day, like the air itself was heavier. Funerals followed. 3 families buried their kids. Closed caskets. Parents standing in front of rooms full of people, trying to stay upright while their worlds collapsed. Friends cried openly. Some stared blankly, unable to process it. Others were silent, pale, clearly replaying their own choices in their heads. The survivor eventually came back to town. She wasn't the same. She had scars. She had long hospital stays behind her. She had surgeries, recovery. They'd see pain that didn't go away. But more than that, she carried something heavier. She carried the knowledge that everyone else in that car died. She carried the memory of being trapped in a tree all night, listening to the woods, injured and alone, not knowing if she'd make it. People didn't know how to talk to her. Some avoided her completely. Some stared. Some treated her like a ghost. Others treated her like a miracle, asking questions they had no right to ask. She became a walking reminder of what happened, and not everyone wanted to be reminded. The driver was dead. That part mattered too. There was no trial, no courtroom, no sentencing, no moment of official accountability. He didn't get to face what he'd done. He didn't get to grow up and regret it. He didn't get to apologize. He just died, instantly, leaving devastation behind him. And that fact complicated everything. People didn't know how to feel about him. Some were angry, some were sad, some were both. Some remembered him as the loud, arrogant guy who never took anything seriously. Others remembered him as a friend, a classmate, someone they'd laughed with just days before. It forced everyone to confront something uncomfortable. This wasn't a freak accident. This was preventable. Drunk driving, speeding, no seatbelts, showing off. Every choice stacked on top of the last one until there was no room left for luck to intervene. It was a chain of bad decisions that ended in death, and everyone knew it. That's what made it stick. It wasn't just tragic. It was instructional in the worst possible way. For a long time afterward, that road felt different. People slowed down when they drove it. Someone put up a small memorial near where the car went off. Flowers appeared, disappeared, then appeared again. The trees grew back slowly, but the memory didn't fade as easily. At school, things changed too. Parties felt different. Not safer exactly, but heavier. People joked less about driving drunk. Seatbelts suddenly mattered. Not because of laws or lectures, but because everyone had a mental image they couldn't erase. A car that didn't turn, a girl hanging in a tree, ladders in the woods at night. For a lot of us, it was the first time death felt real, not theoretical, not something that happened to old people or strangers on the news. It happened to kids we knew, people who had lockers and schedules and inside jokes, people who were supposed to graduate and move on and complain about life later. Instead, they were gone. The survivor eventually moved away. Some said she couldn't stand staying there, surrounded by reminders. Some said she wanted a fresh start where no one knew her story. Either way, she left, and her absence left another kind of silence behind. Years later, people still talk about it. Not constantly, but when conversations turn serious, when someone brings up drunk driving or speed or teenage recklessness, that story always comes up. It became a cautionary tale rooted in real names and real loss. What stays with me isn't just the violence of it. It's how ordinary it started. A party, a car, a road everyone had driven 100 times. A belief that nothing bad would happen tonight. That belief is powerful when you're young. It convinces you that consequences belong to some distant future. Not to you, not right now. That night destroyed that illusion. It showed how fast things can end, how a few minutes of showing off can erase multiple lives, how survival can look like something straight out of a nightmare rather than a miracle. Even now, when I think about it, I don't feel adrenaline or shock anymore. I feel sadness. Sadness for the people who died, sadness for the survivor whose life was forever marked by something she didn't choose, sadness for how unnecessary it all was. It's one of those stories that never really leaves you. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was real. Because it proved that sometimes the worst things don't happen because of monsters or bad luck or fate. Sometimes they happen because of arrogance, alcohol, and a moment where no one said no. And once you've seen how that ends, you never forget it.
Thank you for spending your night with me. I hope these lullabies stay with you, but not too close. If you found these stories chilling, please like the video and subscribe to join the family. Every comment and sub helps us keep the darkness growing. Get as comfortable as you can, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next one. Sweet dreams.